Listen, Eren Yeager has come unstuck in time.
Oh, hi, movies.
It's hard to believe that Attack on Titan as an anime has been going on for over 10 years at this point, and despite the manga having ended about 4 years ago, interest still remains high even with all the relevant episodes easily available on Netflix or other means. Based on a manga by Hajime Isayama, the series has not been without its controversies, ranging from its author's arguable apologia for Japanese war crimes, the frank and sometimes uncomfortable portrayal of ethno-nationalism, and a shift towards decidedly realistic warfare in what started off as a seemingly straightforward escapist, if gritty fantasy about humanity fighting monsters. I am unable to talk about it without touching on at least some of these metatextual aspects, but I will try to focus on the narrative proper.
Editing Ohio here. Well, I wound up watching the movie 3 times, almost 4, due to my wife loving it so much, and this basically turned into a review analysis of the series as a whole, and not just the Last Attack movie, so enjoy.
Attack on Titan takes the gory, grim medieval fantasy of Game of Thrones, smashes it with the paranoid militarism of Battlestar Galactica, and divides it with the eldritch horror and nihilistic psychodrama of Evangelion, with touches of Orwellian information control for good measure. As you probably already know, AOT tells the story of a humanity that has been walled off to defend themselves against the titular Titans, humanoid monstrosities that are generally mindless giant zombies that gruesomely devour anyone unlucky enough to get into their grasp. The barbarians are literally at the gates, and the gates have been smashed through, so it's time for the cool guys with cool weapons doing cool things to push them back. Despite being an ostensibly shonen show, a subgenre associated with the power fantasies of Naruto and Dragon Ball, Attack on Titan takes on a much bleaker tone. For one, astute viewers can note how the world is a rural dystopia. The ruling class ensures that the general public can only know so much about anything, to the point of eliminating anyone who dares to know too much, such as a tragic subplot involving a couple figuring out how to make a balloon to go over the walls, only to get silenced in the most brutal ways after. Even the eye catches in every episode underline this point by alluding to information that can presently be disclosed to the public. Big Brother may not always be watching you here, but he sure as hell makes sure you only know so much. Over the course of the series, we discover that several of the characters that we had thought were human, including our protagonist Eren Yeager, are actually able to transform into decidedly smarter titans, to the point where the later battles read effectively as mecha fights, complete with cutaways to characters essentially piloting their colossal flesh bots. Turns out, just about everyone who followed this point are actually Eldians, an ancient race that descended from a horrifically abused slave girl named Ymir, aka the Founding Titan, who has given her whole lineage the innate ability to transform into the aforementioned giant naked people eaters. Once upon a time, the Eldians were essentially the attack dogs of a brutal despot, and it turns out the heroes we've followed thus far are descended from that lineage and exiled to an island dubbed Paradis, and the titans that they've been fighting are actually other Eldians from the mainland superpower called Marley. There is a lot, and I mean a lot, to unpack here. This being a movie titled The Last Attack, it is no shocker to say that things have evolved considerably from this point. By now, the Eldians of Paradis have already done a sneak attack on Marley, killing soldiers, government officials, and civilians alike in the interest of preserving their people. And the Marleyans, in turn, have also put into motion their own counterattack in the interest of seeing Eldia and its people as a whole consigned to the history books. This has led Eren to unleash his final solution, the dreaded rumbling, wherein the colossal titans that until now made up the walls that house the remnants of Eldia have now been sent out to perpetuate a global massacre. Let me be clear, if you saw the whole thing on Netflix or wherever, you're really only missing out on some improved animation, a slightly tighter flow, and, to be fair, an amazing set of post-credit sequences that pile on even more polarization on top of an already polarizing ending. That being said, The Last Attack is the definitive way to experience this ending. Director Yuichiro Hayashi has been on record that he storyboarded the finale as a standalone movie, and it's easy to see why. So, you can just go from episode 87 of your marathon and then pop in this movie for any future rewatches and not miss a beat. And holy crap, what an experience. It's so nice. I went to go see it twice, and it managed to be that rare movie that wasn't ruined by 4DX and in fact enhanced by it. The good overworked folks at Studio Mappa took over from Studio Wit for the final season, and their hard work has been done justice on the big screen. Unlike so many other quote-unquote theatrical anime based off of other franchises, I never got the sense that I was just watching a TV episode on the big screen. There are some truly stunning wide shots. The colors and shading feel a touch more nuanced and full of intricate details in the backgrounds and clothing, to say nothing of the numerous action sequences. I never get tired of the frantic mix of Spider-Man and Shadow of the Colossus that is seeing our guys zipping around their omnidirectional movement gear. And Hayashi and his crew tweak the animation here and there. You probably wouldn't notice any of this without a side-by-side comparison, but your brain will. The story itself is similarly airtight. You may not like where it goes, but at least it makes sense where it went. The only complaint I could really think of is how effective the rumbling turned out to be. I kept thinking, for how much the earliest parts of the series are so focused on getting to a particular basement, and how the world by this point is obviously used to literal kaiju busting down buildings on the daily. Did no one in Marley have an underground shelter handy? Not even the ruling elites? If the sheer force of a legion of giants marching down through the land would cave in such shelters, it would have done some good to show that futility. Macross, Do You Remember Love back in the 80s had the foresight to show a transforming giant battleship could accidentally but brutally kill innocents in a crisis. So certainly Attack on Titan in the 2020s, with 10 years of animating this sucker, could have thrown us nitpickers a bone. But it is a nitpick all the same. The story otherwise does come off as satisfying insofar that it doesn't pull any punches. People you like will die without any fake outs, and some people you hate wind up getting off scot-free. Some epic duels you look forward to do go down with all the intensity merited. Lots of stuff blows up real good, and everything does come together to an actual definite finale that still leaves plenty of room for people to argue over on forums. This isn't a case where you get a rug pull or a tone shift that cheats the audience. It is often brutal, but it does not betray its story thus far, nor does it betray the personality of its characters. On the topic of characters, I'll be real. For my own sanity, I mostly stay out of fandom discourse and remain largely content to lurk or occasionally chat in real life about this stuff instead. So a lot about this talk about whether Eren is a base Giga Chad or virgin wussy boy, if he had a heel turn or whatever, never really reached my ears until doing research for this video, and all that arguing did come as a bit of a shock. For my money, I see him as a deconstruction of the proverbial plucky shonen protagonist, not unlike the way Evangelion's Shinji Ikari was a deconstruction of the heroic mecha pilot. These comparisons are only exacerbated by how much Eren's Titan form is so clearly influenced by Shinji's Eva Unit 1. It's just not that complicated for me. Eren started out wanting to kill all Titans because they were the enemy who killed his mom and obstructed his freedom. Then, upon discovering the truth about himself and his people's past, shifted to wanting to kill everyone in the world because they are the enemy who threatened to kill his friends and obstruct his freedom. It's all about freedom, baby. It is a bit more complicated than that, to be fair, with a substantial timey-wimey subplot about Eren Yeager pulling a Billie Pilgrim, but it still comes off as a play on how being doggedly single-minded without room for nuance or exploration can lead to tragedy. And tragedy really is the word that keeps coming to mind when considering this story. You started off with this great trio of childhood friends, Eren, Armin, and Mikasa, who inevitably find themselves falling apart due to their fundamental differences. If Eren is a hot-blooded shonen hero who's all about fighting, Armin, on the other hand, is a decidedly gentle and thoughtful soul who seeks the diplomatic option, but can take a life if needed. Then Mikasa is somewhere between the two. She doesn't lack for brains and understands the need for talking it out, but is just as happy to slice down a fool in the service of those she loves. All the same, circumstances lead to each of them going down paths that have this bond fracture, if not entirely break, while still being recognizably themselves. This tragedy is then writ large when you have what amounts to Eren perpetuating a worldwide genocide that leaves few unscathed. We unflinchingly witness whole families, including children, get indifferently crushed by powers beyond their comprehension. The comparisons I've made to Evangelion are not accidental, for it reflects a similarly red-tinted apocalyptic nihilism that nonetheless leaves room for a specter of hope in spite of it all. I've seen comments from people on other corners of the internet, including YouTube, that make comments to the effect that Isayama is an apologist for fascism, both as a compliment to him for being so-called based, and as an insult to him for being so-called cowardly, for not outright condemning Eren and the in-universe Jaegerists, a political cult that was started in his name, for the horrific actions, and indeed, crafting a fully fascist-coded ethno-state in the aftermath of it all. Now, I can't and won't speak for the manga, but I didn't get a sense that the anime's creators were praising the Jaegerists either. I guess it's time for the inevitable tangent, so let's just tear that band-aid off. There are several socio-political illusions at play in the AOT universe. For one, the Eldians in Paradis have been walled off by a king that seeks peace at all costs, even if rival states were to initiate a full-on assault, which is hard not to read off of playing off of Japan's real-world constitutional Article 9, which explicitly renounces war as a means of settling international disputes, and has been increasingly challenged by successive post-war Japanese administrations, as well as an increasing amount of the Japanese public. There's even a satirical article on the Japanese Encyclopedia deriding supporters of Article 9 as leftist cult members. So that's one thing. For another, the Eldians in Marley are forced to wear armbands like a certain minority group that was in a certain country, run by a certain decidedly controversial political party, and treated like hot garbage by the majority Marleyans despite looking more or less like anyone else, aside from the whole transfer into giant people eaters bit. So yeah, it's hard not to see how this became a hot potato of a series. This second part, however, is also where it gets quite interesting, for there is a lot of complexity at play. The series does go to great pains to show that not all Eldians are necessarily good little martyrs, and not all Marleyans are necessarily evil demons. Self-loathing Eldians are happy to kill off their own, and outsiders see the injustice perpetrated upon the Eldians and decide to help them. Persecution does not absolve one from guilt, nor does heinousness preclude a shot at atonement. God, I've been saying the word atonement a lot in this channel lately, haven't I? Anyways, literally nobody in the narrative gets off with their hands clean by the end of it. It's hard to think of a single named character who hasn't been forced by the story to compromise in their own morals at one point or another by the end of it all. I don't know what Isayama's exact politics are, and frankly, time and experience have taught me to care less about trying to psychoanalyze an artist and their work and instead focus on what I personally get out of said art. So for better or for worse, what I see is an intricately crafted parable about oppression and the destructive cycles it can perpetuate. Power begets resentment, which leads to power being overthrown and exchanged, and on and on and on and on and on we go. Yet even in that destructive cycle, individuals can rise above it, regardless of if they succumb to the force of history surround them or not. The story perhaps best shows this in the character of Gabby. Gabby was a Marleyan Eldian who drank the Kool-Aid wholesale. She bought into the narrative that Paradis is exactly the Isle of Devils she was propagandized to believe, and relished her sacred duty to kill every last one of them. She even winds up being the killer of best girl Sasha. Yet, through a story arc that involves her and her friend Falco winding up on a Paradisian farm, she slowly realizes the error of her ways, only then to nearly get shanked by Sasha's adoptive sister Kaya once she's connected the dots. Yet even then do these two crusading children get a reconciliation and a measure of forgiveness for each other. It's here where I see the brilliance of the story. Isayama isn't trying to equate Eldians with any one ethnic group, because these are patterns that can be recognized throughout history in one permutation or another, not just within the 1940s. Or the 2020s for that matter. He definitely has a conservative slant, which isn't all that unusual for many modern Japanese artists, to be frank. But it's folly to say that he's saying bigotry good and destroying world good. If anything, it's the opposite. Bigotry winds up being destructive here. Warfare leads to more bigotry. But all the same, ambition of others will remain a constant factor, and we can only do our best within these walls to rise above it for ourselves, if not for anyone else. The post-credit sequences underline this message. We see a certain tree where a couple of our characters have been buried, and how the landscape surrounding it changes with the tides of history. A sleepy village grows into a towering modern metropolis, and then, out of nowhere, a helicopter strike on a building reminiscent of another recent historical event leads to an all-out war breaking out and engulfing the whole landscape in flames, only then to be followed by a child stumbling upon the tree, much like Ymir herself did many years ago. The end. But then, there's an interesting snapshot of what a modern Eldia could be. Modernized versions of Eren, Armin, and Hot Goth GF Mikasa come out of the cinema and then start debating the meaning of the very movie that we've just watched. And the characters engage in a brilliant meta-commentary on how long we wait for things and, whether it's all worth it in the end. More interesting than that for me, however, are the surroundings. We see signs for Maria's Diner, a clear allusion to what was once Wall Maria. The tree looms large over the city, And for all the destruction that we were witness to for the preceding 87 episodes and 2.5-hour long movie, there is now just a peaceful debate over a film and carefree speculation over what life might have been like a century before. It's interesting how history plays with us. It's easy to forget the bloodshed that we walk over and talk past. So often, the horrors of the past get commodified into cheerful brands, and the streets we mindlessly roam and walls we've been in have had some horrific stories to tell that we remain blissfully ignorant to, or if we do know them, we consciously ignore as we carry on with whatever thing we gotta do that day. For all I know, you and I could be on one of them right now as I speak to you. Attack on Titan could be taken as a bit doomery, as I've heard described by others. But I'd argue that as a work as a whole, it's far from praising any horrific actions. It simply acknowledges them, and is just as happy to encourage us to do what we are able to do with whatever power we have and do the best we can with it. Frankly, Isayama clearly put a lot of his angst and anger into this work. It's telling that he decided to go with a much lighter manga following this about an AI singer or whatever. It's not unlike how Hideaki Anno himself decided to make the psychological rom-com Kare Kano right after finishing Evangelion, in fact. God, I think I'm gonna choose something less heavy to talk about as well next time. Thank you all so much for watching, or listening, or however you consume your YouTube content. If you'd like to see more stuff like this, so you can check out my Nier Automata video, or you can also check out my review of Ed Wood, which also goes into a lot of analysis and nuanced discussion, much like this one does. In any case, have a great rest of your day, and peace.